McGraw-Hill Ascent Audio presents The Retention Revolution: 7 Surprising and Very Human Ways to Keep Employees Connected to Your Company, by Erica Keswin. Narrated by Erica Keswin. This book is dedicated to the men and women on the front lines of the COVID pandemic and for their brave work in one of the most challenging workplaces in human history. Thank you for making this book and our lives possible. Preface. I have a confession to make. This isn't really a book about retention. What I mean is, it's not about retention, but retention might not be what you think it is. Please allow me to explain. When I started thinking about this book in 2021, I, like everyone else, was still reeling as we'd watched the mass exodus from physical offices into people's home offices, living rooms and closets with kids and dogs on laps and spouses in the background reaching into the fridge. It seems like a long time ago now, I realize, but I believe that we'll continue to learn all kinds of lessons from that historic time. Yes, even as we might be clenching our teeth in the short term. In March 2020, for many of my friends and colleagues, working from home started off as a welcome break from the commute and travel. But it didn't take long for it to get old. Whole families under one roof, parents working, homeschooling, once happily single people plummeted into extreme isolation. It's no wonder that along with our Wi-Fi crashing, our mental health did as well. The U.S. Census Household Pulse Survey reported that during the first year of the pandemic, moderate to severe anxiety peaked at 37.3% of the adult population during the pandemic, up from 6.9% in 2019. And moderate to severe depression among adults jumped from 7% to 30.2% over the pandemic. My family wasn't completely unscathed, but relatively lucky. My mom died at the beginning of the lockdown, which was painful and strange. The pandemic will forever be part of my generational DNA. After sharing a home office with my husband for 16 months, I have a new appreciation for something a childhood friend shared. Her grandmother told her grandfather after they retired, "Honey, I love you, but not for lunch." And that was on a good day. Have we ever been so frustrated by the fact that people breathe? But we made it. Today, the kids have all flown the coop for college. My husband and I are back in our own lanes and having lunch together on the weekends. Friends of mine, especially women with small kids, had more at stake. I remember speaking to a friend with an Ivy League education and a big job in tech about how every morning she helped her 5-year-old log on to virtual kindergarten and found only moms and caregivers helping the kids with online school, even if both parents worked. As she described the scene, I could see the writing on the walls. Many women would begin to opt out of the workforce, and opt out they did. As of September 2022, women's labor force participation rate was 58.4%, compared to 59.2% just prior to the pandemic. That means the U.S. labor force has lost 1.067 million women since February of 2020. And an even more depressing statistic to consider, women have added $2 trillion to the U.S. economy since 1970 by increasing their labor force participation. The pandemic has siphoned off 63% of that progress, or $1.26 trillion worth of economic potential. Wow. It wasn't long before my head was spinning as we all watched people quit their jobs in droves, inspiring panic and despair in leaders across industries. Starting in June 2021, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics has reported over 4 million non-farm resignations every month since January 2023. Incredible. In an attempt to stop the bleeding, leaders relied on what they knew and then found some tricks up their sleeves none of us knew existed. Signing bonuses for bus drivers and workers at Burger King, 4-day work weeks, Starbucks home deliveries, total flexibility. They didn't know it yet, but we were in the midst of what has been referred to as the Great Resignation by Texas A&M professor Anthony Klotz. A 2022 search for the term turned up more than 232 million references at such household names as BBC, NPR, Forbes, and Dictionary.com, and leaders were scrambling. The Great Resignation, the Great Reevaluation, the Great Reshuffle, the Great Do-Over, whatever you call it, the shift in hiring loomed large for people around the world, as well as my clients. The writer in me watched closely as headlines like "Talent is winning the war" filled my news feed. Across the board in industries, people demanded to be treated like human beings, and leaders had no choice but to listen. As someone who wrote a book called Bring Your Human to Work in 2018, I was listening too, and taking notes. As I spoke to clients who were quickly trying to react and address these changes, I began to realize that I had a front seat to something historic. I knew the workplace would never be the same. It was exciting, and I was inspired. And then, just as we began to see a new beginning take shape, people and digital-first organizations in late 2022, leaders were hit with a new kind of panic. Companies were hit with rounds and rounds of layoffs, inflation, a looming recession, and market volatility, insecurity as far as the eye could see. New headlines started popping up. From the Wall Street Journal, tech workers face a new reality as talent wars turn to pink slips. And, as white-collar layoffs rise, blue-collar resilience faces test in 2023. From the New York Times, getting rid of remote work will take more than a downturn. And from Bloomberg, U.S. employees say they're losing the upper hand as layoffs mount. Were the tables turning like the pundits and journalists predicted? Would the Great Resignation become the not-so-great back to business as usual? Turns out that in 2023, yes, while tech took a beating during what seemed like the downturn of Q4 in 2022 and Q1 of 2023, there were over 10 million jobs open and only 5.7 million people unemployed. That's almost 2 job openings for every job seeker. As a Gen Xer who has been in the people space for over 25 years, this was not my first rodeo. I worked as an executive recruiter in the early 2000s during the dot-com crash, which eliminated more than 1 million jobs. And then, fast forward to 2008, I was once again on the front lines, counseling leaders through unexpected layoffs in my job as a career coach at the NYU Stern School of Business. This is the cycle of business. It's not easy, but the pendulum always swings one way and then the other. And this is where I want to share the one lesson I've learned watching this whole thing unfold. It's bigger than the expected expansions and contractions in the job market, and I believe it will have lasting impacts long after the COVID crisis has been written into the history books. In the so-called war for talent, everyone loses. I know it might not seem like much, but the very notion of employees and employers on opposite sides of the bargaining table is breaking down, to everyone's benefit. Instead, successful companies understand that employees are actually your most important stakeholder, your most valued customer, in fact. Leaders can't hoard employees. Instead, people must be treated with respect and dignity, which may include supporting them as they move on. The fact of the matter is, the revolving door of talent is not a problem. In fact, quite the opposite. When you learn how to harness all that energy, what you get is a virtuous cycle of robust opportunity. And then your whole perspective shifts from trying to keep people in their chairs to understanding how important it is to help people learn and develop and evolve, even if it means they're working for someone else. Which is to say, when I started this book back in 2022, I, like everyone else, wanted to know why so many people were quitting and what companies could do to bring people back. And I, like everyone else, thought we could solve the problem of retention if we could just find the perfect cocktail of benefits and perks. I quickly discovered that I was asking the wrong question, especially the "how can we bring them back" part. We're way beyond any superficial solutions, and I still believe it. As soon as I started unpacking the very idea of retention, I realized we had to reframe everything we thought we knew about how work works. That's why the very concept of retention is changing. And that's why this is a retention revolution. And it's not really even about retention anymore. Though it's not about retention either. It's all about meeting people where they are, as they are, for as long as they choose to stay connected, which will hopefully be long after they leave. This is a new, very human, very real world, and there's no going back. Introduction. Isn't it ironic? Old idea. Stability leads to growth. New beginning. Dynamic change powers the ecosystem of today's workplace. Everyone knows that in order for anything to develop well, children, books, ideas, markets, companies, the chaos must be tamed, right? I mean, doesn't stability lead to growth? Well, not necessarily. In fact, when we look more closely at how progress actually happens, we can see that instability is not just an important part, but a necessary part of the process. Let's take a look at the topsy-turvy world of employment over the past few years. Data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics show that as of January 2022, the average tenure of a U.S. worker is about 4.1 years, as compared to 4.6 in 2014. And according to career planning site Zippia, 65% of American workers are actively searching for a new full-time job right now. On top of that, we've seen the highest quit rates since the 1960s and 1970s. This turbulence is certainly bumpy in the immediate for many, but also filled with potential in the long term for the whole. To wit, since 2020, the United States has seen an unprecedented rise in new businesses. In fact, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the United States has seen the largest increase in new business applications in recorded history. Specifically, more than 4.3 million new business applications were filed in 2020, an increase of 24% over 2019. So much so that experts like John Lettieri, a co-founder of the Economic Innovation Group, EIG, reports that he and his colleagues were doing this mutual head-scratching like, what is happening? Is this going to last? And things kept taking off. As Atlantic writer Annie Lowrey puts it, the past few years have seen what she calls creative destruction at play, the exact opposite of stability at all costs. She writes, COVID-19 killed countless businesses. Surprisingly, it also launched a whole bunch of new ones, which is not entirely due to predictable measures, like different sectors being affected by lockdowns or the economics of government stimuli. She explains, the coronavirus destroyed brick-and-mortar restaurants, but boosted spending on delivery. It killed gyms and yoga studios, but increased interest in personal fitness equipment. It decimated formal office wear sales, but boosted revenue for skincare and loungewear. It halted business travel, but led to the uptake of virtual conferencing and collaborative work technologies. When the ground is turned up, growth is possible. Now, of course, losses are painful. There's no denying that. And there's no doubt that short-term hires and turnover are expensive, to the individual company at least, anywhere from half up to a whopping 2 times an employee's salary. But if we zoom out to look at the big picture, we can see how a failure in one area can very well lead to success in another. And how one company's ex-employee just might be the world's next best entrepreneur. In the retention revolution, if we play our cards right from the moment we make contact with the people on our teams, that very same ex-employee can continue to be an asset as a company's referral source, brand ambassador, and maybe even a boomerang employee. Not to mention, their new venture just might solve one of our biggest problems or provide a service that enhances our lives. In other words, because our time with employees is increasingly short, we need to reconceive talent as just one part of our long-game strategy. As former head of HR at LinkedIn and author Steve Cadigan puts it, higher turnover builds more extensive networks, and greater network traffic enables the exchange of more intelligence and ideas. Indeed, in the retention revolution, we transform employee churn into a positive return. rather than a desperate attempt to retain people by keeping them chained to their desks with golden handcuffs. The retention revolution means we lean into recognizing the future as an open ecosystem of opportunity, a virtuous cycle. After all, since the very definition of retain is to keep, hold on to, or possess, we know that goal is misguided. Clearly, we can't control employees. We can't control anyone, nor should we. Our lives and companies will always be in flux. Change is the one constant. And isn't it ironic? And I will describe in this book, when you accept change, your business has a much better chance of lasting. When you support a commitment to your employees' individual growth, commitment to your company just might follow. When you help employees connect with their own purpose, your company thrives. As a bona fide control freak, I get it. The chaos seems scary, especially in business. And that's why I wrote this book, to help you shift your point of view and see how every end has the potential to be a new beginning. The Retention Revolution, 7 surprising and very human ways to keep employees connected to your company, is the paradigm-shifting guide for brave leaders ready to see some of their most fundamental assumptions about work in a new light, one that can support and inspire a truly human workplace. Specifically, we will dismantle 7 old ideas about work and then rebuild them into new beginnings. These 7 old ideas are: 1. Onboarding is the thing you do before the real work begins. In fact, you only have one chance to make a first impression, and boy, will it last and last and last. 2. Employees are only working when you can see them. It's official. Autonomy and flexibility make work work. 3. A human professional is an oxymoron. Blending vulnerability and professionalism is a hallmark of today's workplace. 4. Meetings are just what you do. In fact, they can be much fewer and far between, and fun. 5. Professional development should be job-related. The reality is, companies benefit so much from employees who are deeply connected in their lives that personal development is professional development. 6. Managers are in the messy middle of their career and your organization and are easily overlooked. Today, they're your MVP. 7. There's the door. Don't let it hit you. The retention revolution says goodbye to such black and white linear thinking and celebrates the virtuous cycle. And that's not all. We'll explore important themes, aspects of the revolution that need to be integrated in everything a human leader does. For instance, instead of limiting diversity, equity, and inclusion to one chapter, I've incorporated elements of diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, throughout. Today we know that a business cannot be successful if people don't feel like they belong. It's time to move this critical work from the margins of our thinking to the center. I'll also explore the way our beliefs about technology have changed. We used to think that tech is like money. More is always better. Today we know that throwing technology at a problem, or money for that matter, is so before times. Every chapter has a tech box that highlights companies and/or products that have successfully found the sweet spot between tech and connect. There's never been a more confusing time to be in business. That's why I've written The Retention Revolution for all leaders, especially those I've met since March of 2020. The ones who are stressed to the max, dealing with what social psychologist Dr. Amy Cuddy calls the pandemic flux syndrome. That anxious, not knowing what's next feeling we all experienced at one time or another. But the retention revolution is bigger than a pandemic. Yes, I'll take what we've learned and operationalize it for the future using concrete science and stories from companies that have thrived in the past 3 years. But more than just a response to this moment in our cultural timeline, the retention revolution will improve our companies and our lives under any condition. It's true that leaders, employers, journalists, and experts have been pointing to this talent upheaval as one of the biggest challenges companies have ever faced. Perhaps it's also an opportunity to put to rest some old ideas about work that no longer serve us, starting with the assumption that turnover is bad or permanent or represents a closed door. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Muse, an online career platform, surveyed 2,500 U.S. adults and found a prevalent issue, shift shock, which they describe as that feeling when you start a new job and realize with either surprise or regret that the position or company is very different from what you were led to believe. 72% of respondents felt this shift shock, and 48% said they'd try to return to their old position if they experienced it. What's more, 80% said it's acceptable to leave a new job before 6 months if it doesn't live up to your expectations. And according to a CNBC article covering a Grant Thornton report of the 21% of U.S. workers who found a new job in the last year, 40% are already actively looking for another job. Smart companies will learn how to ride the wave of this revolving door, especially since so-called boomerangs accounted for 4.5% of all new hires among companies on LinkedIn in 2021, up from 3.9% in 2019. The fact of the matter is, the world of work is always changing, and so is our relationship to talent and to work itself. But it can be hard to keep up. Of course, chaos and uncertainty are fundamentally frightening. But after studying these shifts closely and working with leaders during these turbulent times, I've seen firsthand that the strongest leaders are the ones best able to look at the big picture and embrace agility. They look to the future instead of clinging to the past. They're willing to dig deep, personally and professionally. So if you want to join the ranks of leaders whose companies are even stronger and more resilient than they were before 2020, you are going to have to let go of some of your most dearly held beliefs about business in general and the employee life cycle in particular. The time is now to reconsider everything we know about the employee journey and why linear thinking is being replaced by the more human reality of cycles, revolving doors, and dynamic change. As the management consultant firm Korn Ferry put it, about climate change, but applies to the human organization too. To become truly sustainable, organizations need to shift to a circular economy strategy. And please note that this time has not come just because of COVID and the social turmoil of 2020 to 2023, the combination of which has carried so many critical issues about power, identity, real authenticity, and mental health into mainstream conversations. Nor will any current or future round of unfortunate layoffs or other hits in the labor market affect the need for a new way of thinking about work. The fact is that even before these upheavals, the ways many leaders thought about the employee experience had not caught up to the tectonic shifts in our economy. Gone are the days of the IBMs and General Motors of the world offering employees a life of stability in exchange for commitment to the continued production of their wares. Today, we live in a service economy held together by easy access to tech for both employees and consumers. This has given rise to gig workers who could move in and out of jobs as they see fit. Today, the power of flexible, remote, and asynchronous work is highlighted all the more, paving the way for those who are nimble and self-sufficient, and leaving behind those top leaders in golden handcuffs, confused and wondering when we'll be returning to the office, which is code for wondering when things will return to the way they used to be. For the record, I don't think we're ever going back to the way things were, nor should we. Today, employees and companies join forces to create as much value as they can, together, moving in and out of connection in ways that actually benefit everyone involved, including shareholders. In fact, Great Place to Work found that treating employees well leads to higher stock prices, by a lot. In 2020, companies from their Fortune 100 Best Companies to Work For index outperformed the broader market by 16.5%. Instead of fixating on the price of turnover, shooting for stability at all costs, this book invites listeners to consider how too much stability can lead to languishing, to use Wharton professor and author Adam Grant's pandemic-famous word, or good old-fashioned disengagement. According to Gallup's State of the Global Workforce 2022 report, lack of engagement cost the world $7.8 trillion in lost productivity. That's equal to 11% of global GDP. Also, according to Gallup, organizations in the top quartile for most engaged employees are 23% more profitable than the bottom quartile. When it comes to cultivating a healthy pool of vibrant talent, the questions we really should be asking are, who is leaving and why? Are these people you can afford to lose? Or are they going after a development opportunity you didn't provide? Or maybe they don't feel like they belong, and it's time to take a long, hard look at your culture and get those values off the walls and into the halls. If all this out with the old, in with the new talk feels overwhelming or intimidating, rest assured you're in good company. Leaders and managers in every industry are anxious to know what they can do to transform their thinking and their teams to stay relevant and healthy in this new way of work. So you're definitely not alone, and I'm honored to be your guide. Some of the work we'll do together is concrete, granular, and difficult, and some of it is incredibly simple, yet profound. Like with any paradigm shift, once you identify the places in your thinking that need to change, voila, you're on your way. Chapter 1. Start as you mean to go onboarding. Old idea number 1. Onboarding is that thing you do before the real work begins. New beginning number 1. Onboarding sets the tone for what can hopefully be a long, possibly winding, but mutually beneficial relationship. When my kids were little, I was obsessed with the British child psychologist Penelope Leach, whose mantra became my mantra: start as you mean to go on. Which means, for example, if you want to raise a well-mannered young adult, you can begin by teaching your toddler how to clear their plate after a meal. Rinse, repeat 1,000 times. Onboarding anyone into anything, a family or a community or a company, is always a process of co-creation. We will always be creating some kind of culture, whether we're aware of it or not, by encouraging some behaviors and discouraging others. So when we're the ones who get to set the tone, we have to be intentional right out of the gate. Easier said than done, I know, especially at work when we have to fight against so many entrenched ways of doing business. Remember, when impersonal and transactional tasks like getting your parking spot, assigned seat, computer passwords, bathroom keys, and benefits packages passed for onboarding? When flipping through unreadable corporate speak handbooks was the stuff that would inspire a long-term personal commitment to the company? Onboarding was the stuff that needed to happen before real work could begin. A box check. Today, at smart companies, onboarding is being rebranded, thankfully, as the beginning of that long and winding, mutually beneficial relationship. Onboarding is actually a way of welcoming someone for what Reid Hoffman, co-founder of LinkedIn, podcast host, and serial entrepreneur, calls a tour of duty. After all, in the retention revolution, employees are building their own careers as they pass through your company, coming and going, and perhaps returning, all the while adding value, developing themselves and others, and sharing their wisdom. These first interactions during the earliest days, even moments, of onboarding are an opportunity to share the tools employees will need to get the most out of the time we spend together. Company values, the culture you're so proud of, and how each and every individual is so important. Yes, there's a lot of transactional work that must be done, but don't miss the boat. Paying attention to a person's need for purpose and community is the right thing, the human thing to do, but it's also good for the bottom line. One of the most oft-repeated statistics you can find in pretty much every guide and article about onboarding is some version of replacing an employee can cost up to 2 times their salary.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?